What is your nobody will ever believe this story? Story 1. I work for an airline and like all other passengers, we are not allowed to bring raw meat into the country. If you get caught smuggling, it's an official warning plus a note in your dossier. Second time means losing your job. One time I flew back from Brazil carrying this beautiful 1.5 kilo picanha and 1.5 kilo alcatra beef for a nice BBQ. When we arrived at the airport, customs were waiting for us at the crew checkpoint. I wasn't the only one carrying beef. I stuffed the beef in my carry-on suitcase, and the co-pilot had his beef in his flight bag. The co-pilot walked up to the customs officer, and the officer asked, "Do you have anything to declare?" Stone cold, the co-pilot told him no. "Please put your suitcase in the x-ray, sir." The co-pilot put his suitcase in the x-ray, but held on to his flight bag. He walked around the machine and picked up his suitcase, thanked the officer, and walked on. He didn't get caught because he didn't put his flight bag in the machine. My turn. "Where do you come from, and do you have anything to declare, sir?" "I arrived from Sao Paulo and have nothing to declare." "Okay, please put your luggage in the machine." At this point I thought that I could get away with it. The co-pilot did not have to put his flight bag in the machine, so I wouldn't have to put my carry-on in either, I thought. I put my suitcase in the machine and started to walk around the machine. "Sir, did your carry-on come from another destination?" "No." "Then put it in the machine as well." I knew I was fucked right then. 3 kilos of beef smuggled into the country. That would be an official reprimand plus a note on my dossier. It was too late to tell them I had beef in my carry-on at this time. I put my carry-on in the machine and walked around where the officer was watching the x-ray. There I was, waiting to see the 3-kilo beef appear on the screen and get caught. At that moment I hear a beer bottle cap sound go once, twice, and even 3 times. The officer reaches into his pocket and opens up his WhatsApp. At that moment my carry-on scrolls across the screen, clearly showing the beef. The officer opens up a video on his WhatsApp and doesn't even look up once. He starts laughing and says, "You're good, have a nice day." I took my suitcase and carry-on and walked away slowly until I reached the corner and started to half run into the crew area, where I quickly said my goodbyes to the crew and went home. It was the best BBQ beef I have ever had in my whole life. Story 2. My dog and I were on a walk on our local college campus one weekend, and he nosed a lilac bush that was apparently full of little butterflies. They all took off into the wind, and then proceeded to do a perfect little spiral around me. I was so dumbfounded by them all that I was spinning in circles trying to see them all, which probably contributed to them doing a spiral. I was making air currents with my dress, but then it culminated with them landing on my head like a crown, presumably because of the sweat. Butterflies are weird like that. My dog by this time is sitting nearby waiting for me to get over it and keep walking, looking majestic as heck with his own little smattering of butterflies hovering around his face. It was wild enough on its own, but then I hear the shuffling and vague gasping sound, and I look in time to see that there was some guy walking by a ways away who had apparently tripped over his own feet from staring. From his perspective, it must have been surreal. I was wearing this fluffy, billowy red dress because I'd just gotten back from church, and I always walked my dog barefoot to make sure I never took him on surfaces that were too hot during the warm weather. My dog was this enormous wolf-looking husky mix, and at the time I had longish hair, so for all he knows, he walks out of the library and sees a legit Disney princess in a cloud of butterflies with a giant wolf standing guard. It was the most ethereal and fancy I've ever felt, even without knowing there was a witness. I mean, a cloud of butterflies materialized from a lilac bush to form a living crown. It was breathtaking. Story 3. When I was a kid, 10, I went to the library with my sister, 12, and my mom. My sister and I are doing the usual walking up and down the rows of books finding whatever. Eventually we split ways, and a while later I found my mom and asked her where my sister was. She hadn't seen her. So we went looking in the last area I saw her. She wasn't there. We go to another section. Nope. The next section. Nothing. We go to the other side of the library. Nothing. We check the bathrooms, outside the doors, and do another lap around the library. Nothing. We asked the library staff if they had seen her, and they hadn't, but they agreed to start looking. About 30 or so minutes have passed at this point, and we are starting to panic. We continued searching every last corner of that library, and now we have started shouting her name, and others are as well. I'd say an hour into it, my stepdad was called, and he was on his way, and he was even stopping cars as they left the library parking lot. This whole time there were 15 plus people looking for her and shouting her name. If she was in that library, she would have heard us. My mom was at the front desk, and she picked up the phone to call the police, and my sister came walking toward her from the kids section, completely unaware of what had happened. She said she was sitting in the kids section reading a book on skateboarding the whole time. We asked her how long she had been there, and she said maybe 15 minutes. It had been over an hour since we saw her. I don't know what happened that day, but she was absolutely not in that library. We never went back. Story 4. My friend and I were just sitting outside a 7-Eleven with some 40s in a packed hash pipe on St. Patrick's Day back in like '09 or '08. We were pretty loaded when this Ford Explorer came tearing around the corner like a bat out of hell. He sideswiped a whole row of parked cars, which tore his bumper and a bunch of other shit off his car. The dude stumbled out of his car, picked up as much of his broken car as he could and stuck it in the back, got back in his car and took off. We were standing there, totally blown away, when less than a minute later a cop came tearing around the same corner. He asked us if we saw what happened. We said yeah. And he asked us to come with him to ID the guy. So we grabbed our 40s in the hash pipe and hopped in the back of the cruiser. I asked the cop if I could smoke a cigarette, and he said I could. So then I told him that because of my MG card I could smoke cannabis anywhere I could smoke a cigarette. And he just cracked the windows a bit as we hauled absolute ass down the main boulevard, roasting hash and chugging 40s the whole way. The Explorer was pulled over a couple miles away. The cop pulled over and we all got out. Still smoking the hash, we give our statements between puffs and swigs. They confirmed the story since the guy had his bumper in the back like we explained, and the paint transfer and everything matched the story. The cop dropped us back off at 7-Eleven, at which point we had to buy some more beer and pack another hash bowl. That was a fucking crazy night. Story 5. Back in my drug days, I was at a meth cook's house, and he had just finished a batch off a day or so before and was gonna try it by slamming it. He did the plunge, and about 3 seconds went by, and I heard screaming coming from the cook room. I stand up and go to the room, and he's grabbing his arms and face yelling louder. He stands up and knocks a burner over and spills some kind of liquid all over it, and it just basically explodes half the room. He moved out of the way just enough to not get fully engulfed in the flames and only caught his pants area on fire. So I'm helping him move to the bathroom while 2 other guys are putting out the fire. Since he was a cook, he actually had multiple fire extinguishers in his cook room, and they're getting it surprisingly well. I get him in the shower and I'm running water all over him, and he keeps saying he's on fire. All I can see is little bits of blood from his eyes, nose, and palms of his hands. His leg was kinda burnt, but nothing crazy. He's screaming about being on fire still, and I can't figure out what is up. Hospital time. Turns out he cut his meth all shitty, and it had lots of lye in his mix. It was seeping out his pores, eyes, nose, mouth, ass, everywhere. He was in the hospital for almost a month. Went to jail for a little over a year. Fire department still came for the fire and saw everything, and got completely sober after that. He works as an off-the-books help for a caretaker at a local park now. Story 6. When I was 8 years old and my sister was 7, we both had the same dream and ended up sleepwalking together in the night out into the middle of the road. Let me give you some backstory. Earlier that day, we had new neighbors move into the house behind us. They had 2 daughters around our age that we quickly made friends with. Well, that night my sister and I both dreamt that we were running in a field full of sunflowers, picking them for our new friends. I felt so happy and carefree in the dream, and I could see my little sister running alongside me, also picking sunflowers. Well, when we woke up, my mom and our neighbors were there telling us that we had both been sleepwalking around outside together holding hands, and about to walk into the middle of the street when my neighbors, not the ones we had just met, who had just got home, spotted us. The wife ran to grab us, while the husband ran inside his house to get his gun before going into our house to check on them all. Because we had left the front door wide open, they thought there might have been a break-in. My mom is hard of hearing. She is completely deaf in one ear and only has about 15% of her hearing in her other ear and wears a hearing aid but takes it off at night to sleep, which is why she never heard us go out the front door. Anyways, after we realized what had happened, we talked about everything and literally recalled all of the same details and remembered seeing each other in our dreams. It's now been 20 years and we still remember everything the same and stick by our memories of that night. I'm just grateful to our neighbors because who knows what would have happened if they didn't notice us. Story 7. I grew up in a haunted farmhouse. Some weird stuff that went down in that house over the years. Saw an old man ghost walking down a corridor who disappeared into a room at the end. About 4 other people saw this same ghost over the years. Sometimes you'd hear a baby crying really badly. There were no babies/small children in the house, with the crying coming from a certain old bedroom. But as soon as you got close to the room, the crying would suddenly stop. Saw a load of weird sparkling light entity things chasing each other across the floor in the cellar once. They were like flying sparklers and emitted a good vibe, but as soon as I turned on the light, they disappeared. I was pushed down the cellar stairs once when nobody was around. Sometimes at night you would hear a car drive up the gravel driveway and way outside the house. But when you looked outside, there was no car to be seen. Sometimes you would hear the sound of a car speed off the driveway, but equally no car to be seen. We lived in the middle of nowhere. One time my nanny was sitting by the window as I got ready for bed when we heard the noise of the car, and as she peeked out the window curtains, she suddenly froze. She looked very intently. The car noise drove off, and when she turned to face me, she looked as white as a sheet and refused to say what she had seen. One time I managed to see the car. It looked like my old dad's car, but my dad had died years ago, and parked on the driveway there was just darkness inside the car, no driver. I looked away for a moment, and when I looked back, the car had disappeared. My dad died in a cold case, but was probably murdered. Sometimes you'd hear a ghost walking around the house at night. I forgot all about it until years later when my bro had to house sit the place with his girlfriend, and she got so freaked out by all the paranormal activity in the house. After spending 2 weekends there, she refused to spend a night in the place again. And my bro wondered if my dad had become trapped as a restless spirit ghost because of his unsolved case. As crazy as it sounds, I wonder if he is right. There's more stories, but those will do for now. Story 8. Tina Fey visits the town I live in every few years because her husband's family lives here, just a tiny town in Ohio. I was in high school when I learned this because a few classmates worked at Dairy Queen, and she would come in almost every day during their visit. I mentioned this to my best friend, and my bestie tells me that her grandmother is actually close friends with Tina Fey's in-laws. Another one is something that happened to one of my teachers in high school. This happened in the mid-2000s. This teacher has an elective class to study song lyrics since he's really into music. Usually 10 students at most take this class every semester. They were analyzing lyrics from a John Mellencamp song, Can't Remember Which, since I heard this story 11 years ago, and ended up writing John a letter saying how they really enjoyed the lyrics. A great surprise to the teacher in class was when John contacted the school. He was doing a show in a nearby city and came in the day before the concert and visited the teacher and students. He gave them tickets to the show for the following day, and they gave him a shirt with the school name and mascot on it. John wore the shit during the entire concert. Story 9. Once I had a Shih Tzu that I really wanted to see out of the lower window of the front door. The door was in a mudroom behind an interior door as well. One day I saw the dog running in circles in the living room, and he picked up speed and ran the interior door. Eventually, the laminate started cracking. I come home another day, open the interior door, and the dog greets me, fully soaked. I don't pay too much attention to anything and run to see if he had jumped in the toilet. Everything looks fine and dry, but then I look at the carpet in the living room and see wood pieces all over the floor from the interior door. I thought dogs didn't sweat from their skin, but couldn't explain why the dog was wet after having worked all day to destroy the door. He gets reprimanded, and the behavior stops. Until I come home another day to a wet dog. I immediately check the floor and don't find any wood. Check the bathroom, and it was fine. I close the door and see more destruction, at which point I notice the carpet isn't laying flat. I lift it and find the wood pieces from the door under it. He movie D the starpt. These destroy more of the door, then put the starpt back. Dog gets reprimanded again, but a few days later, Gary ts me ate the front door window. An entire foot of the bottom of the door has been systematically destroyed, and now he was happy. Story 10. I have a few stories, but this one gets the most eye rolls due to its religious nature. I was kayaking with my mom, a couple of siblings, and a family friend who's a Catholic priest. Father got caught in a fallen tree in a particularly swift part of the river and capsized. After he popped back up, he quickly exclaimed that he lost his glasses. We all got out of our kayaks and started searching. It wasn't a good idea because of the current, but he was nearly blind without his glasses. We searched for a solid 15 to 20 minutes with no success. We all figured that the glasses were hundreds of feet downriver by then, lost to us for good. Father sighs and says that before giving up, we should ask for Street Anthony's help as he's the patron saint of lost things. We stood no more than 20 feet downriver of where Father capsized and prayed for Street Anthony's intercession. When we said amen, Mom got the shocked look on her face. She bent under the water and picked up the glasses. She said she felt them tap against her foot when we ended our prayer. Folks rarely believe me when I tell this one. Confidentiality telling me that my mom had had the glasses the whole time. She didn't. Believe me, she wanted out of that cold Michigan river as much as the rest of us did. There was no reason for her to hold on to them.